Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webcast. My name is Maria Postolniak. I'm a staff reporter here with the Globe and Mail, and I'm super thrilled to be your host and moderator today. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which the Globe and Mail headquarters is situated is the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis Nation, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work and live on this land. So over the next hour, we'll talk about business succession and legacy building, which means everything from managing family dynamics to wealth protection. And we'll also explore the different factors influencing this critical life step. And to help us do so, today's event is presented with support from Doane Grant Thornton. We're also excited to have a representative from Grant Thornton on our panel today, along with other speakers who are sharing their views independently. As we go along, if you can all just type your questions into the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can just a little bit later on. So without further ado, let's introduce our panelists. We have Lou Celli. He's a partner at Doane Grant Thornton, a leading Canadian accounting and advisory firm that provides services to private and public organizations. We also have Marissa Freed here, president of Freed and Freed, a luxury vegan outerwear brand. And then we have Isabelle Liberton Miller. She's a professor of management and chair of succession and family enterprise at HEC Montreal. And then finally, we have Don Sahota. He's a partner at Clark Wilson LLP. So welcome, everyone. So glad you're here. Thank you so much for joining us. And let's just jump right in. Maybe we'll start the discussion with Lou. And let's just start with the basics here. We know that more than 60% of family enterprises are set to change hands in the next 10 years or so. How do family dynamics impact the succession process in Canadian businesses, Lou?
Thanks so much, Maria. And Don and Marissa, it's a pleasure to see you again. And Isabel, it's nice to meet you. Thank you all for joining today. Family business, and what's not to love? On its own, family business has an incredible benefit and advantage over everyday businesses in that there's a number of benefits and advantages that it has just through the fact that it's a family business. More so, the fact that it has generations available to add to its ability to carry forward is certainly both an advantage and a conflict point. So if you think about what transpires every day in boardrooms, you have founders that could very well have been in business for decades and have grown businesses into the multi-millions of dollars of value. And they have beside them a number of generations, perhaps. They have second generation, which it tends to be very loyal to the founding generation. And sometimes they have third generation that comes in newly minted from university or education that wants to do things differently. In a best case scenario, it works, and it works well. And sometimes you have some strategic misalignment that comes from perhaps sibling rivalry or even something along the lines of father knows best. At the heart of it, the founder's vision and entrepreneurial success have driven that business to the success that it's in. The second generation's respect for the rules has fostered that sense of continuity. And the third generations want to continue the entrepreneurial desire, will carry it forward, but it makes for quite a stew. And it makes for a paradox of success versus conflict. So family dynamic is wonderful from the perspective that it allows for the continuity, but it's fraught with potential for conflict if not managed.
Aspect shortly after, but Don, do you want to tackle this question as well?
Yeah, I think it's the family business. I've been working with family businesses for 38 years as a lawyer, and I've seen everything. I've seen it work extremely well, the transition from first generation founders to the second generation. I've seen the disasters. I've seen family fights go on for, I just wrapped up a 10-year fight among siblings that was going back and forth to court. And my concern for family business owners is that what the parents want is the family to be together and be have a great relationship. And if you don't manage the succession properly, you can actually create more conflict than should be there. So there's a great opportunity to pass on the business to the family, and it does work, but it has to be done carefully.
Lisa?
Sorry, Maria, can you repeat that? We didn't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, Marissa. I just wanted to see if you wanted to tackle that question as well.
Sure, I think I'll come at it from a bit of a different angle. I think from an experience point of view, I think both Lou and Don come from helping people like myself. And from my point of view, I'm on fourth generation. And I think I tend to agree that ideally, the concept of family business is to have some continuity and some family pride, and at the end of the day, foster some family wealth. I do think, typically speaking, every generation, especially today, if you go back, a couple of generations in my family business, for example, things were more aligned with what could be produced, what would be coming out of the factory, people's mindset and their concept of business. I think in the last generation or two, even, things have changed drastically. So that brings about its own challenges, irrespective of the family's wishes. And then beyond that, I think dependent on how many siblings there are and what generation is positioned to take over, if at all, then sort of drives perhaps how well that transfer can be and how clear that succession planning needs to be in order to really attempt to map things out to try and avoid having to see Dawn for 10 years.
And I do wanna follow up on that point about kind of preparing the next generation leader. I wanted to see if Isabel had anything to add first to that question.
Just to jump with what Marissa and Lou and Don just said, I think I think all of us love family businesses. We're definitely not against that form of organization, on the contrary. But I think we want to preserve family harmony. We want to have a successful business, and we want owners that are happy. So sometimes we need to think about maybe we don't need to force ourselves to transfer it to the next generation. Maybe sometimes to avoid to be 10 years in Don's office, we might need to think about maybe selling. And it could be selling to our own employees or selling to an outsider. I think family harmony is also valuable, and I think we should not remove it from the table. I do agree with what Lou says, that family business have fabulous advantages, but you need to be able to to leverage them. And if you're in a fight for 10 years, it seems it's a bit compromised. And the legacy is among process, it's among the culture inside the company. And if the founder had done a good job, there's a good chance it's part of the culture of the company, and it might potentially be transferred to someone else, not just someone from your family. But that's I know maybe people around the table don't want to talk about selling the business, but that's a possibility that needs to be taken seriously. The other thing also is more and more we're talking about families in businesses. So if we sell the business, maybe that wealth created could be helpful to start new businesses among family members. So I think that should be entrepreneurial spirit among generations could be fulfilled differently. Doesn't need to be necessarily with the original business or with the original people around the table. If there's such a conflict, 10 years, my God, I'm sorry. So I don't want to take more time. Maybe you had another question you were hinting, Maria?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up because you're talking about selling the business as a way to avoid almost family conflict. Out of my own curiosity, are you seeing that happen more often, or is it still more so?
No, but it should not. It's not that it should be part of the potential solution. It should not be excluded. And here, because we're talking about planning a succession, it's like we need to have option open, depending, because when Lou started the conversation, he was talking about billion-dollar companies. Billion-dollar companies, maybe we could do a succession on the ownership front, the management front. I'm sorry to tell you guys, but we don't have a lot of kids these days, so your talent pool is quite reduced. So, okay, passing on the business to one of your siblings might be not the best idea. I don't know. I'm not sure we necessarily have the talent. I mean, for TMT, top management team. So it's like we need to be, I think, more open and not just that was one of the elements that's also something newer in the conversation, thinking about, okay, we could be good owners, and let's have the management of the company taken care by the best people in the company or on the market. We don't need to have the onus of thinking we need, as a family member, to take over big positions if we don't have necessarily the desire, the competency, the track record, the legitimacy to do it. I think it's, or let's say you're competent, but it's not your dream. You're going to put a lot of stress on yourself. I think, and we need to consider the business as part in general of a community. I'm seeing Marissa here, I'm sure she's thinking about the employees around her and maybe family generations working in the business. So you're thinking about your community. You don't want to destroy the business. You want in general to grow it, to make it better. So that's onus on whoever is taking care of the business as owner and or manager.
Thanks so much, Isabelle. I just wanted to build on something you've all talked about and ask, how important is it to actually formalize government structures in family-owned businesses for a successful succession, that's a mouthful, to happen? And maybe we can start with Lou again, if you wanted to kick that off.
Yeah, so absolutely. And, thanks, Isabelle. There was a lot there that you indicated, and I'm going to touch on that to answer this question as well. So at its heart, governance is communication, number one. And two, it's a set of rules that stakeholders through consensus agreed to in how they're going to operate and basically live together within their business. So, without governance, it's a bit of a free-for-all. Also, it's a bit autocratic. The founder tends to continue to make all the decisions, no matter how many stakeholders are there. And so, what Isabelle touched upon before is very true. As the businesses grow and mature, you tend to have what was once an owner-managed business, very entrepreneurial setup, where the founder just made all the right decisions to get there a number of decades later and create this incredible wealth for the family. But now you have all these other stakeholders. And so you have, as I alluded to prior, you have second generation, which is dutiful and loyal, third generation with all their new ideas, management that has stuck around for decades as well, and given loyalty and all of their expertise. And without the right governance or communication, you continue to have that autocratic behavior of, what I say goes. And then you tend to lose some of the stakeholders along the way or create that conflict. And so, to guard against that, governance doesn't always come naturally to entrepreneurs. It's something that is a bit of a learned behavior and is critical to create that consensus to allow for the company to continue on.
John, did you want to add to that, or Isabel, do you want to respond to any of the points?
I'd like to add, first of all, I agree with Isabel that transferring to the family, the next generation, is not the only option, and every business owner should consider every other option. And I'm finding that the majority that I deal with tend to sell to a third party, and that allows a fund of money to then let the next generation do their own thing and self-actualize themselves, which is healthy. You can sell to management. You can pass it on to children, but each one of those things is a different process, and each one of them requires different governance rules. Governance is very critical because without governance, you're going to be thrown back to the general law, and that means back in court, back in the dealing with the Corporations Act, dealing with the general rules. And if you don't provide things like exit strategies, you're going to get conflict. And let's face it, children fight. So, you're going to end up with fighting. And it's not just the fighting that's the problem, it's the angst and the stress and strain on the children that then translates to the business. So it's not necessarily, if you don't have governance and have rules around what happens, who's in charge, how are decisions made, if someone doesn't want to be in the business anymore, how do they get out? Those types of rules, you're basically heading towards a disaster. And I've said many times, the parents' goal for their children is to have a harmonious relationship forever, and then the next generation as well. But when you handcuff children together in a business, you get, with no exit strategy, you get tension and you get fighting. And the ultimate goal of the parents of a harmonious relationship is never achieved, or cannot be achieved sometimes, many times actually. And the exact opposite, you get the whole family blowing up. Now, just one example quickly before I finish. Many years ago, I acted for a woman and her brother in the business, and the father was in his 80s. He passed it on to the two of them. And my client wanted to expand the business. The other fellow decided he didn't want to expand the business. He was happy with where it was. And my client saw the business was going to have trouble in the future if they didn't do something. Conflict ensued. Long story short, the father ended up having to side with the son. My client got bought out. And the last thing, I still remember this, the last thing she said to me, you know what I'm going to do? I'm moving as far away from those two people as I can, and I'm never speaking to them again. Now, I know that is not what the father wanted. That is not what the father wanted. But that's what happened. So without governance, you're going to have those types of scenarios.
You also talked about, if I could just follow up, the goals and how you're communicating those goals to your family. Like what went wrong in that situation, and how could they have, I guess, communicated better in that instance? What could they have done differently now that you're looking back at that specific scenario?
Well, I think the problem was they didn't even think about governance. They didn't pull in professionals who have dealt with these scenarios before and who can see predict what's going to happen in the future if you don't put the rules in place. And so they just went ahead and did it with their own ideas in mind, with the big idea. This is a great idea. My son and daughter are going to be friends for life, and they're going to run the business together. It's all going to be wonderful. And the exact opposite happened.
Marissa, I know we've talked a lot about some of these challenges with you during previous conversations. Can you maybe touch on some of those points as well?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to obviously again only be able to speak from my own experience, but I think what's most important, and everybody is somewhat touched on it in this group, is communication. I think that's actually where most founders or the current generation running the business end up falling short. they get to this point where they're riding high, they're doing a great job, hence they're even in the position to hand it off, typically at least. And there's no clear plan. There's no family communication, family meeting to address, who's in the position to do this? How does it make most sense? What are the feelings of all the siblings involved or whoever else comes into the picture? Should this be passed on? And I personally have come up with my own terminology to identify some of these issues. And I like to call it the CEO complex. I find that the CEO complex can last somebody their lifetime. And unfortunately, it does set up for conflict within a family. And I tend to agree with Don and Lou and really, I mean, everybody on this panel. And being a parent myself, I can't imagine that any parent is trying to position siblings or family in general to end up in a difficult position and arguing with one another. And then that takes us back to Isabel when, if the real point of having a family business is to grow family wealth, that communication is key. And then you can simply sit down and address, if one of us isn't equipped or if there's going to be hard feelings or whatever it may be, it does make sense to look elsewhere and to look to sell or transition to a third party in some way, shape, or form. Should it be somebody in the family's dream, finding a place for that person to stay put for the interim or whatever it may be? I do think that what ends up happening really and where generational businesses fall short is specifically in that planning and with that communication. And I think perhaps part of this panel is, even for myself, I'm sitting here learning about different things that can be done and different ways to better address some of that conflict that does arise, because typically speaking, I don't know, I guess Dawn and Lou can probably correct me here, but I would assume there's got to be a 90% opportunity of conflict, if not higher, at some point in time in a generational family business.
If I could just add one point, we often hear this point being made that, communication is key. But if we can just unpack that a little bit, like what does that mean in practice? Does that mean, meeting with an advisor, sitting your family down with someone who can kind of be a mediator in this? What does that look like? Maybe from some effective examples that you've seen. Anyone can answer that, I guess.
Yeah, so if I can jump in on that one, because frankly, this is what we strive to do for our clients. And this has been a passion of mine for the last 7 years. When we're engaged to quarterback, and I like to use the word quarterback, we quarterback the scenarios. We listen to all the stakeholders. So again, to list them out, it's all the generations that are at the table and not have any biases only towards what the founder would like to see happen. Because that's what tends to happen. I think Marissa called it the CEO complex. I call it the family paradox. What works from a business perspective in the boardroom struggles in the family room. And I think what you have then is the ability to listen to all stakeholders, all generations, siblings who are not in the business, family who are not, but have a stake in the wealth of the family, key senior management, hearing all of what's going on in their minds. And, sometimes management's the forgotten group here. They see it all happening and can be very insightful as to what's going on with the family. Then finding the common ties and presenting options, knowing that not all these options are going to work. You have to plant seeds. You have to give it time. Succession is not just a tax and estate plan and paperwork that's presented to a family. Succession needs time. You need to plant the seeds, they need to germinate, and you need a plan B. You need to be able to pivot. You need to be able to read the room. And then when you get that consensus and those options come to fruition, finding that way forward is the harmony that I think we're all talking about.
Thanks, Lou. Isabel, did you want to weigh in on that? I know we kind of sidestepped there. Would you want to add anything to that?
What's fascinating, I'm listening to all of you, it's clearly you need an outside look. Here, because all of you mentioned, so someone from outside, be the TMT, top management team helping. And we started that the last bit of conversation on governance. So governance here, we have governance of the business. So basically a board or advisory board, whatever you want to call it, I think is the first, I suspect, step to help the owner for his business. But at the same time, you're helping the business, you need to plan for, I call it contingency. If they don't want to talk about succession, contingency, anything happen in the business among your top key players, what's your plan? So that for me, from that point of view, you might have it in to have a better a manager that will listen better to the survival of its firm, anything happen, or just on that front. The other part, it seems here that the people we're talking about, it's the governance on the family side. So here you want to have conversation happening there, but again, it's clear that someone from outside, it seems Lou handles family, maybe family council or meetings of the family members, I think is an important part of the equation. And usually it's good when it's not the owner of the business handling that part of the equation. So that's why we would have a Lou maybe starting that conversation and making sure everybody has a chance to express itself. So in the literature or in the research or even at INSEAD, they have what they call the FAIR process. And among the FAIR process, it's obviously having open communication, but give a chance to everybody to express itself. When people feel also that they're listened and express themselves, what's their view for the family or for the business, family business, then it's easier after to agree on rules, on what's the objective for the family, for the business, to join effort to make it happen. If it's only decided by the owner of the business and in his mind or in her mind in general, because they don't want to reveal their plans, they like to keep their cards close to themselves, you know. The fact that you start a conversation through governance, I think that's an ideal situation to bring everybody on board, and it includes the top management team, which is also an outsider. And if we want to talk just about the succession, I think they should be included, and the rules of the game, or what I would call the requirements down the road, needs to be established for everybody who could be involved, not just the family members, but all the key players around the table. And it's a long plan. It's a long process. So those clear expectations at time zero might evolve because the business will evolve. The people will succeed in different mandates, would reveal themselves. So I think it's a fluid, the plan is kind of fluid, but you still need to start a conversation. You still need to have everybody on board if you want to avoid conflict. I don't think we could avoid, and I think it's good to pretend we should have no conflict. I think it's a false hope, and I don't think it's a good thing. To go to war, then it's a different story. To talk to each other, in the example Don mentioned, that's very problematic. And also when I hear that the person was 80 years old, still involved, to me, it's a lot of red flags.
Dawn, I want to give you a chance to respond and weigh into that, but Isabel, if I could just go back, you said it's a long process, and I've heard so many estimates. You know, you should start 15 years in advance, 10 years in advance. When should you start having these conversations, or should you always just be having these conversations?
For me, I think because in general, the people who are managing a business, they're on the day-to-day, you know, managing the business. It's the least of their it's not necessarily part of the agenda. Often it's the board that's gonna push. So what's the plan? Or are you planning? Are you thinking about it? What's going on? Obviously, we could understand it. They're busy. There's the daily business thing, but also it's your mortality. You're here. It's your legacy. You're gonna give it to who and what's going on about you. So we often take a lot of time to, we prepare the next generation, but we also need to prepare the person who's leaving. And that notion, it's a long process in the sense that if you need to bring up to speed the key players in your organization to be able to take over, obviously it's not overnight. It's like in your case, to be the senior editor of the Globe and Mail, could you do it tomorrow morning? No. But, I mean, I suspect, I look at you, you seem quite young, I'm maybe projecting, but I suspect, you're going to need to have, and I'm thinking here in my mind, the New York Times, whoever took over, the Sulzberger family, you could see how long it takes. It's often a process of 20 years for someone to take over, 20 years, because you need to build up your competency, your legitimacy, and et cetera. So for sure, it's a long process. I don't think anybody around the table is going to say, no, just the night before and the way you go. Though sometimes it happens because maybe someone might pass away and you're left with, but hopefully we're planning for it.
Dawn, did you want to add to that? I know we kind of added a few questions into the mix there, but the initial question was about communication.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Isabelle and Lou have said. One thing I've noticed is that the mistake that a lot of business owners make is they think succession is a legal and accounting matter, legal, tax, accounting. And so they go to their lawyer, they go to their accountant, and they come up with a plan. And the problem is it's psychology is a huge part of that. And we've been talking about that this whole time. It's all the emotions, all the baggage in the family, all that stuff has to be worked out. And if you just go to your lawyer and say, this is the plan I want to implement, and the lawyer just dutifully implements the plan, you're going to have problems. You need to have someone like for example, Lou, to have the family meetings. And as a lawyer, I can't do those family meetings because of conflicts. Who am I acting for? Am I acting for the founder? Am I acting for the children? Am I acting for the management? Who am I acting for? And if I go into those family meetings and hold those meetings, I'm on thin ice because everybody thinks I'm acting in their best interests, and this area is rife with conflicts. So there's a process that needs to go to do this properly. You have to deal with the human psychology involved, and the problem cases that have come across my desk have really, I think, arisen because there has been no thought to the human psychology in this process. And there's just so many things swirling around. You need to talk that out. That's where you get to the communication part. And then everybody knows what the deal is and what they're thinking about and what the other person wants. And then you can start planning out and what's the legal structure that we're going to implement. What are the tax rules we're going to look at and that sort of thing. But communication on the psychology side is very important. And lawyers are not psychologists. So I think that you need to have someone who's trained in this area to deal with that psychological aspect.
Maybe we can jump into the next question and start with Marissa for this one. We've all talked about, how to maintain good relationships with existing employees in your company. Maybe Marissa, you can talk a little bit about how can businesses address the challenge of retaining key staff during the succession process?
Sure. Yeah, great question. I feel like we continue to use the same words over and over again, which I guess is something everybody listening here should pay attention to. But I think a huge part of that is communication all over again. I think it's communication with your management team. It's identifying what people within the organization wish to stay on board and talking to them from the very beginning, prior to fully transitioning the business, if you will, the decision making, and understand, how do you, first and foremost, you also want to identify, I'll go backwards here a little bit, but you also want to identify who you yourself would like to retain, because you don't want to lose that institutional knowledge. So that's important. So you identify that. I think you identify who wishes to remain on board for the transition as well. And I think your starting point is simply, again, that communication factor, and ensuring, people understand what your plan is, what's your vision, what have their experiences been to date, what are areas that they see that could be improved upon. People that aren't within the family unit and are taking a little bit of a side seat to everything going on, sometimes are able to see clearer than the family itself, who's going to have a bunch of emotion involved in this transition, no matter which way we look at it. And then I think once you achieve that conversation, you then want to discuss perhaps like incentives for employees that choose to stay on board. You want to address career development. Maybe they feel they've been stifled a bit by a previous generation, or they have more to give, or they feel another area is of interest to them, and they'd like to find if there is an opportunity for them, to learn more, to, I guess, feel more involved with the outcome of the business itself. You want to ensure some sort of stability for those retained employees as well. And then again, it just circles all the way back to communication, I think. I've jumped around a little bit, but I think that I've kind of pinpointed some key areas there.
For sure. No, we have some recurring themes here, absolutely. I wanted to go to Dawn and Lou. I know you often have what can go wrong, some examples of what can go wrong when you don't implement those strategies. Maybe you can speak to that question a little bit, and maybe share some examples of what you've seen in your own practice. Either maybe Lou can start.
Yeah, so picking up on what Marissa was talking about, I do think I just want to touch upon the management side first. There's a natural to me with family businesses, they tend to start out as owner managed, and the founder really, sets the vision of the company going forward, and frankly makes the rules. I think as next generations come in, there tends to be a shift from owner managed mentality to perhaps professionally managed, and so you have your existing management team has a natural opportunity ahead of them to really grow in their roles. I'm finding that, and almost to a family, mostly third generation comes in and really wants to do things differently than their grandparents did. It's a much different age we live in right now, and they're talking about things their grandparents never talked about, and so in doing so, they want to live different lives as well as run the companies differently. So that gives the management team a natural to grow into different succession roles themselves. That's a great retention factor. Back to your question then, Maria, of what could go wrong. I think Don alluded to it earlier in his example. Chaos is the word that I like to use for it. You take an owner-managed business, and again, that's not to say a connotation of a smaller business. Owner-managed business just means that the family is in control and calls the shots. And I think when you have multiple generation calling the shots, and you have sibling rivalries, or you have cousins that are making decisions to exclusions of each other, what's a company to do? And again, successful companies that have a great product, significant wealth, great valuations, it's a slow erosion that happens, and your management team feels it, your customers feel it. Chaos is the word I would use.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So much can go wrong, and it's again it goes back to psychology. And one thing that you have to keep in mind is the the founders' generation, their family are the parents and their children. So that's the pyramid. Then when the children grow up and get married, they start their next pyramid, and their allegiance now has shifted from their allegiance to their parents and their siblings to their allegiance to their spouse and their children. And so that creates tension. And then, of course, there's always the spouses talking to the children in the business saying, well, why is so-and-so getting this, or why is so-and-so doing that? And that creates more tension. So lots can go wrong if you don't set this up properly. I one time I met with this fellow who we went for lunch, and he brought his one of his sons. The other one was in Asia. And he said, so what do you think of my business succession plan? He pointed to his son. I said, well, that's great. But, and he said, my other son said, I'm fine as long as I get my dividends. And I said, well, that's great, as long as your son in Asia is happy with letting your other son run the business and get paid a big salary, and won't complain when his spouse starts saying, why is he paid so much money and going to all these conventions and traveling on the company dime, right? So there's just so many things that can go wrong if you don't set this up properly. And the message is really get advisors who have seen the problems and can predict what's going to happen, and they can avoid years in court. They can avoid by putting in the right governance structures, by putting in the right processes to adjust for these types of scenarios.
When you're finding, I guess, and I'm just curious, when you're finding an advisor, when you're choosing someone to speak to, how do you know if you're picking someone who's right? What kind of questions should you be asking them? Like, well, how do you measure that?
Well, it's a very good question. It's a hard. You have to ask the questions. You have to ask, what's your experience? Have you done this? I mean, many times there are professionals that are just in this space and they're known for being in that space. Ask your accountants. For example, I find the first step for business owners is to go to their accountant. And if your accountant is dealing with the professionals in this area, Lou or me or others in the similar roles, then they will help move forward. But many times your existing service providers are not the right people to deal with, because they may be excellent at what they do, but they don't have the experience in this very specific area. And there are many disciplines that are required in this area, and you need that experience to be able to give the right advice.
If I could piggyback on that, I think we've talked about it before, psychology, starting with people. I think if your service provider is defaulting to paperwork and a product, defaulting to a tax plan, defaulting to resolutions, legal agreements, those are all resultant projects that come from a plan that works for the family, for the stakeholders, for the team. So I think when choosing who your advisor or your quarterbacks are, it's someone who puts the family first. And remember, we talk about business. The business is an asset of the family. Like, that's a very interesting distinction. At the end of the day, we're talking about transition of wealth of a family, of which that business is one aspect of it, albeit most of the time the most valuable aspect. But remembering that that business could have long-term strategic visioning and planning, and everything we're talking about is a family that has the same type of long-term strategic initiatives and planning, and that's what's usually missing.
I want to give you a chance to weigh in on some of these points, but I also wanted to add a question into the mix, if that's okay. I want to understand, because we've talked about, how to kind of implement a successful succession planning process and the strategies, but how can families actually measure the success of their succession planning efforts?
Thank you for the question. I'm just gonna go back to what Lou, Don, and Marisa just said. So here, we have different specialists, and if I hear well, when I hear Don, I think Don would be my lawyer. Lou, so he would be No, but I mean, it could be on the front, on the side of the family, or maybe the business. And I'm having Lou, who's definitely said it. I'm for the family. But here we need specialists also for the company. So what we discovered just with that little conversation is that family businesses have specific needs, and the professional you're going to be selecting needs to have the right competencies for whatever they're dealing. Could be the ownership, could be the business, because the business might need also some consulting or some help on certain aspect. And obviously we have Lou for the family. But again, we need to be sure that the people have the right competency and understand what's at stake here. And in general, often, and you could already see, I suspect Don and Lou are already working potentially on with some family businesses. You have often teams of people who knows each other, works well, which is also good for the family and business, or the business family. Your question was, how do we measure the success?
Yeah.
I suspect depending on the families, Lou would say it's the well preservation for the family potentially, and harmony. So, but we could always think for sure on the side of the family, harmony in general is top. I don't think we want to, and it's not like an employee that you fire usually, or that you let go. Usually you want to keep your brothers, sisters, niece, and your parents close to you. You don't want getting rid of them. So that's the harmony would be for the family. For the business, how you measure it, I would suspect minimally survival. And on the better hand, you want growth. Marissa won't be against growth in her Fred and Fred business. I'm sure she will say, yeah, I'm for growth. And for if I'm an investor, let's say I would be a silent investor in the company of Marissa. For me, maybe I would say it's return on investment, profitability. But if I'm a good owner for Marissa, I would be a long-term owner. So I would let her install, have a chance. So we could have different ways of evaluating what's success. It needs to be taught, and it needs to be, again, we go back, communicating, sharing our view on that matter to understand what it is for each of us, what success means. So I'll let the others talk.
Yeah, if anyone wants to jump in with something really pressing, that's totally okay. I'll leave the space to do that. I did want to just ask one question, and if anyone can, provide some quick points before we jump into the audience questions. Do you have, just off the top of your head, some tips for preparing the next generation leader? Maybe if we start with Marissa. So I feel like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'm going to go back just a little bit about the identifying success, because I think we're all sort of saying the same things in a roundabout way. I think there's two sides of defining a successful succession plan, and they're divided between business and family. Period. At the end of the day, because there's opportunity for the business to be successful regardless of whether the family is still involved or not. There's an opportunity in general for the family to be involved and grow that business, or perhaps it's not even growth. Perhaps it's downsizing the business and ensuring that it can feed all of the players in a fashion that I guess the right word is de-escalates any potential for conflict. I think that again, now we circle back all the way to communication, and then from a successful succession planning from a family dynamic, I think it's ensuring that the family itself is still together and you haven't divided the family in attempting to pass on the business. And there's no right or wrong. It's dependent on the business, it's dependent on the family, it's the priority, I suppose, at that point in time of the family itself. And what is the priority of the family? Is the priority of the family ensuring the continuation of the business? or is the priority of the family ensuring I suppose like sharing of the wealth, if that's what's grown from the family business itself. So anyway, I will stop on that note, but I do think that there's different ways to identify success of a succession plan.
And I don't think it should be one or.
I agree.
And,
Yeah, well put, Isabel.
And I totally, I'm sorry, agree. I didn't want to put pressure on growth for you or any business.
No.
It's true that it's your own objectives, and it could be to just preserve jobs in Winnipeg or in Canada. It could be whatever objective you fix yourself.
Lou, I see you wanted to add something. I'll let you go there.
I don't hide it well. So back to the question of leadership. Great question. So without training, we fear, and I believe we all fear, that leadership has the connotations of calling the shots, controlling the wealth. It's the opposite. Leadership is always doing the right thing first, leading by example, taking care of everyone. The paradox, and life's full of paradoxes, is that owners of companies, in a way, take care of and report to all of their team. They are stewards for the safeguarding of that asset for the benefit of every one of their employees, stakeholders, customers, suppliers. And that's leadership, is understanding that. And, some formal training helps, of course. Formal training always helps for stability, but it's time. And again, we live in this world where patience is something people used to talk about. Technology plays tricks with us. Everything, news is immediate. The concept of being patient and learning over time is a bit of a fallacy these days. And I think leadership is something that is very much learned over time. Certainly the founders learned to be great leaders over decades.
If I can just build on the leadership point here, with a question from our audience. Someone wanted to know, what are the key differences between leadership succession and ownership succession? Is anyone able to weigh in on that?
It's two different things, because often we will see a management succession happens, and whoever founded or the previous owner keep the ownership, and that sometimes create awkward moment, because some of those people who own the shares never let go of those shares, and so they're still very involved in calling the shots. So I think I could let Don talk on that effect. Maybe Don, you want to add to that?
Yeah. I think you have to. Their leadership is different from ownership, obviously, but I think they should be together. I think that a leader should be an owner, and it's very hard to have an owner who is not a leader, and a leader who's not an owner, because there will be conflict again. You can see, that someone who says, well, you're the leader of the business, but I own it, and I'm overriding you on this point, right? So there's potential for conflict in that scenario. I'm not saying it can't be done. There are many businesses who have management running the show, and the family steps in the background. But again, there has to be rules around that on how that's going to be operated, so you don't get capricious behavior or someone pulling rank, and then the result of that is leadership leaves, and then the whole business is in trouble. So I think there is a difference between the two.
And there is the crux of it. Like, we have leadership, which I think we're subbing in for management in this case. So we have management, we have ownership, and we have family. And without the set of rules and the communication that we've been talking about now for 45 minutes or 50 minutes, any one of them could try to trump the rest. And, as Don just said, the capricious behavior kicks in and the chaos and the conflict starts. So tremendous difference between all three. And it's finding the harmony between all three that good companies become great companies.
We actually have another question where someone wants to know the difference between a family business and a business family. So I think with the business family, they mean it's someone where there's significant wealth, but little to no next generation involvement in the business. And then in the family business, it's the next generation works in the business. Can you maybe, can one of you share some of the differences between the two and maybe the challenges that would be different for them? Maybe Isabel, if you wanted to go first.
Okay, I think I might be the one who mentioned it, so I'm kind of responsible here. I see Lou saying, yeah. Okay. In general, family businesses is one business versus usually throughout the time. If the business is successful, there's some there and they don't need all that money and reinvested in that business. So we create wealth. And that wealth allowed the family to invest in other businesses. And so it's like we have a family in businesses. So, and we see it quite, I would say most of the businesses, even when they're small, medium size, often we will see around us, they minimally invest, at least in my neighborhood or in my environment. Often they will invest in real estate. They left, to divest some of their assets, not to have it just in their businesses. And if you look around the world, let's say in Asia, it's like clearly it's like conglomerate. So yeah, but so that was the difference. The difference in succession, obviously, here you have more than one business where you need to think about succession. So you demultiply potentially the problem. But you could imagine that we need to have a bit the same process, the same rules need still to be implemented. But again, we don't make that many children, so we will need to use external managers. I'm sorry, Don. We can't have everybody, all the family members managing everything. We'll need, with the size and with the quantity, the numbers of businesses, you'll need to have outsiders managing your business, and you'll just be an owner.
Don, did you want to add anything to that? Did anything?
Yeah, no, I agree with what Isabel says. There's the rise of the family office, and where a business gets large, they invest in other businesses, and then they have management running those businesses, so they become more like private equity, and the business is driving the revenue, and it's being further invested into real estate or other businesses. There's lots of examples here where I am. But that means then that if you go down that road, first of all, you have to have a very successful business to get there. But secondly, you've probably figured out the management and leadership roles and training and processes because you're already successful. So it's a big step to get there, but it can be a very successful approach.
Yeah, if I could build on that, I think earlier, Maria, you asked the question, what does success look like? And I think we're touching on it now. When conversation starts around this topic of conversation, it usually starts with how do we manage our business? How do we transition the leadership of management? And then as some of these tenets, what we're talking about, start to take root, we start talking more about how do we lead, and we talked about what great leadership could look like, or what does it mean to be great owners of the business and allow management to come to fruition as great management. But really success looks like when there's a shift from being a family business to being an enterprising family. When, as I talked about earlier, when you're looking at the business as a core asset of the family's wealth, and the family is doing the strategic planning now instead of the business, and looking at all of their assets being the company itself, real estate, other wealth assets, and they're strategically planning all of it at once. That's what success looks like.
Got it. Well, Lou, that's a really great way, I think, to wrap up wrap up this panel. I'll leave you with a stat that I thought was interesting, that only about 30% of the family businesses make it to the second generation, about 12 make it to the third, and only 3 make it to the fourth. So I hope some of the tips and strategies we've discussed here will be helpful for anyone wanting to make the best decisions to ensure a successful transfer of their business. Thank you, Lou, Marissa, Isabel, and Dawn for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank
And
you.
thank you.
Thank
Special
you.
thank you to Dawn Grant Thornton as well for today's event. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Here.
Thank you.